Hi, boys and girls. I'm the reading teacher. Today we're going to practice a great skill called visualizing. Visualizing is when you make a movie in your mind about what you're reading or what you're listening to. It's helpful for the reader because it really helps you connect to the story. You can smell things that the character is smelling in your imagination. You can see things that the character is seeing. You can pretend you're there, and it really helps you to connect and understand what you're reading. We're going to practice this skill today with one of my favorite Christmas stories. It's a story by Chris Van Allsburg. You may have even seen the movie. It's called The Polar Express. And Chris Van Allsburg not only wrote the words, but he illustrated this beautifully. So really watch the pictures, but also be great listeners because the language that Chris Van Allsburg uses is wonderful for visualizing. He uses great adjectives that really help us see and hear and understand what this character is going through and where this character is. At the end, I'm going to ask if you can name your favorite sentence in the story or your favorite thing that you got to visualize. Okay, so be listening for that too. Here we go. The Polar Express. On Christmas Eve, many years ago, I lay quietly in my bed. I did not rustle the sheets. I breathed slowly and silently. I was listening for a sound a friend had told me I'd never hear, the ringing bells of Santa's sleigh. There's no Santa, my friend had insisted, but I knew he was wrong. Late that night, I did hear sounds, though not of ringing bells. From outside came the sounds of hissing steam and squeaking metal. I looked through my window and saw a train standing perfectly still in front of my house. It was wrapped in an apron of steam. Snowflakes fell lightly around it. A conductor stood at the open door of one of the cars. He took a large pocket watch from his vest, then looked up at my window. I put on my slippers and robe. I tiptoed downstairs and out the door. "All aboard!" the conductor cried out. I ran up to him. "Well," he said, "are you coming?" "Where?" I asked. "Why, to the North Pole, of course," was his answer. "This is the Polar Express." I took his outstretched hand, and he pulled me aboard. The train was filled with other children, all in their pajamas and nightgowns. We sang Christmas carols and ate candies with nougat centers as white as snow. We drank hot cocoa as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. Outside, the lights of towns and villages flickered in the distance as the Polar Express raced northward. Soon there were no more lights to be seen. We traveled through cold, dark forests where lean wolves roamed and white-tailed rabbits hid from our train as it thundered through the quiet wilderness. We climbed mountains so high it seemed as if we would scrape the moon. But the Polar Express never slowed down. Faster and faster we ran along, rolling over peaks and through valleys like a car on a roller coaster. The mountains turned into hills, the hills to snow-covered plains. We crossed a barren desert of ice, the great polar ice cap. Lights appeared in the distance. They looked like the lights of a strange ocean liner sailing on a frozen sea. "There," said the conductor, "is the North Pole." Imagine how excited this little boy must be. The North Pole. It was a huge city standing alone at the top of the world, filled with factories where every Christmas toy was made. At first, we saw no elves. "They are gathering at the center of the city," the conductor told us. "That is where Santa will give the first gift of Christmas." "Who receives the first gift?" we all asked. The conductor answered, "He will choose one of you." "Look!" shouted one of the children. "The elves!" Outside, we saw hundreds of elves. As our train drew closer to the center of the North Pole, we slowed to a crawl. So crowded were the streets with Santa's helpers. When the Polar Express would go no farther, we stopped, and that conductor led us outside. We passed through the crowd to the edge of a large open circle. In front of us stood Santa's sleigh. The reindeer were excited. They pranced and paced, ringing the silver sleigh bells that hung from their harnesses. It was a magical sound, like nothing I'd heard. Across the circle, the elves moved apart, and Santa Claus appeared. The elves cheered wildly. He marched over to us and, pointing to me, said, "Let's have this fellow here." He jumped into his sleigh. The conductor handed me up. I sat on Santa's knee and he asked, "Now, what would you like for Christmas?" Wow. So this little boy was chosen to get the first gift of Christmas. How many of you have imagined sitting on Santa's knee and having him ask, "What would you like for Christmas?" I knew that I could have any gift I could imagine. But the thing I wanted most for Christmas was not inside Santa's giant bag. What I wanted more than anything was one silver bell from Santa's sleigh. When I asked, Santa smiled. Then he gave me a hug and told an elf to cut a bell from a reindeer's harness. The elf tossed it up to Santa. He stood, holding the bell high above him, and called out, "The first gift of Christmas!" A clock struck midnight as the elves roared their approval. Santa handed the bell to me, and I put it in my bathrobe pocket. The conductor helped me down from the sleigh. Santa shouted out the reindeers' names and cracked his whip. His team charged forward and climbed into the air. Santa circled once above us, then disappeared in the cold, dark, polar sky. As soon as we were back inside the Polar Express, the other children asked to see the bell. I reached into my pocket, but the only thing I felt was a hole. I had lost the silver bell from Santa's sleigh. "Let's hurry outside and look for it," one of the children said, but the train gave a sudden lurch and started moving. We were on our way home. It broke my heart to lose the bell. When the train reached my house, I sadly left the other children. I stood at my doorway and waved goodbye. The conductor said something from the moving train, but I couldn't hear him. "What?" I yelled out. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Merry Christmas!" he shouted. The Polar Express let out a loud blast from its whistle and sped away. On Christmas morning, my little sister Sarah and I opened our presents. When it looked as if everything had been unwrapped, Sarah found one last small box behind the tree. It had my name on it. Inside was the silver bell. There was a note. "Found this on the seat of my sleigh. Fix that hole in your pocket. Signed, Mr. C." I shook the bell. It made the most beautiful sound my sister and I had ever heard. But my mother said, "Oh, that's too bad." "Yes," said my father, "it's broken." When I'd shaken the bell, my parents had not heard a sound. Now, who do you think Mr. C is? The package said, "From Mr. C." Do you think it's Santa Claus, Mr. Claus? I think you're right, because it's the bell that was on his sleigh from last night. Now, why do you think the mom and the dad can't hear the sound? I'm just going to let you think about that. At one time, most of my friends could hear the bell, But as years passed, it fell silent for all of them. Even Sarah found one Christmas that she could no longer hear its sweet sound. Though I've grown old, the bell still rings for me, as it does for all who truly believe. I wonder if you could hear the bell. All right, what was your favorite part? Which part do you think helped you make such a good movie in your brain? Did you love the part about the North Pole, or visualizing the train going up, up, up those mountains that almost scrape the moon? My favorite part is when they're on the train and Chris Van Allsburg describes what they're eating and drinking. Eating candies with nougat centers as white as snow, and drinking hot chocolate as thick and rich as melted chocolate bars. I can almost taste it in my imagination. Boys and girls, visualizing when you're reading or listening to a story is so important because it really does help you connect to the story and understand it better. I hope you loved this Christmas story, The Polar Express. I wish all of you a Merry Christmas, and I will see you soon.